draw for the raffle. But we also have a second place prize. It is, give us this, our daily bread tray, and whoever wins this, their name is going to go back in the bucket for the drawing for the pellet grill smoker.
Okay, we're ready to go.
Yep.
My hands are not sticky, it's all legitimate. And I didn't put my name in here, because it'd be kind of awkward if I picked my own name. But
Turn the light on.
so this is the second place winner for this, and it's going to go back in again too. And I need my glasses up so I can read that, or you can read it.
Hey Brian, guess what? Jonah. Draw it again instead of Jonah? All right.
Okay. Here we go.
Brian Peterson. And I know Brian is not here. I know I will give this to Brian tomorrow morning at church.
Okay, this goes back in. This is not for the big one. This is for the big barbecue grill.
Yeah, the pellet grill smoker.
Grill smoker. And the only catch didn't tell you about it is whoever wins this has to have a barbecue for everybody else that loses it. So might cost them more.
We'll make arrangements for you guys to pick it up, because I didn't bring it because it weighs 160 pounds. I'm not feeling that energetic today. Dave Parsons?
Anybody like that here?
Anybody? Dave Parsons? Is that that's what it says? Okay. Well, Dave Parsons, I'll be giving you a call.
Sounds like a band.
Yep. All righty.
Okay, we're good to go?
We're good to go. I thank you, sir.
Okay, I'm going to head up the top there.
All right. And anybody who likes free gifts? My wife wound up getting this. This is a bracelet, and it has a little metal tag on it with a cross. And by his wounds, we are healed. Words. Anybody would like this? Or I'll just throw it out to whoever grabs it. How's that? Hey, Adrian, catch. All right, thank you.
Well, thank you for the invitation, being here. I consider myself very fortunate to be here. 10 days ago, I had surgery. And as us men get older, sometimes our body does strange things. And I had an abdominal hernia that they fixed 10 days ago. It's amazing what the medical community can do anymore to get you back up and get you going. But I didn't want to miss out on coming up here because I've got some stories to tell that hopefully it'll touch your heart, and it may look at your life a little bit different. But it's just great to be here. Sometimes patience is required in life. 48 years ago, when I was a young man at 25, just newly married, my wife and I bought a piece of land in Amish country, intending to build a house there. 48 years later, we still haven't, because my life happened, as also happens to all of us, children, debt, school, and jobs. So it never happened, but my wife passed away 18 years ago, and people said, why don't you just build a house, and then God might bring you a wife? And I said, no, I'm going to wait until God brings me a lady, and then we'll build a house together. Next spring, I'm going to build that house 49 years later, because a year ago I got married to my wife Nancy, who's sitting back there. And the Bible says 2 are better than 1. And in this case, it's worked out that way. As I was preparing for my stories I'm going to tell today, I wasn't quite sure where to start. And I said something to Nancy. I wasn't sure where I'm going to start my talk. And she said, well, why don't you start at the beginning? And I thought, well, okay, yeah, beginning of what, the cancer journey? And I thought, oh no, she's talking about the beginning of my hike on the Appalachian Trail. And she said, no, why don't you go to the beginning? In the beginning, God created. And all of a sudden, that made a lot of sense, because in the beginning, God created a lot of things, but he created a garden with trees and flowers and water and all kinds of nature in there. And for me, nature is so healing. As a young boy, I was born into an Amish family, and then we went to conservative Mennonite. We had no radio or TV, so for me, the woods became my haven. And there's just something about about walking through a field and then all of a sudden entering into the woods. You folks that go hunting, you may know this feeling where you just, that woods accepts you and you're in there and the nature is all around you. And I just love walking into woods and just experiencing the beauty of nature. Psalms 19 says, the heavens declare the glory of God. And also in Luke, we're talking here about if we don't worship God, the rocks and the hills will worship God. So nature is for us. And I realized one day hiking in Tennessee, seeing these beautiful flowers, and I was just praising God, and I just hear his voice saying, they're yours. I created them for you. You're an heir. And I realized we are heirs to everything God created. Not only are we heirs, the scripture says we're joint heirs with Jesus. That's pretty powerful stuff when you really think about it, that we are joint heirs with Jesus. Everything God gave Jesus, it becomes us because of heirs. Now, as I got married and got older, of course, children and debt, like I said before, but then cancer it kind of invaded our homes. My wife had cancer, and it was devastating, but it happens in a lot of lives. We dealt with it, but the time came where it was getting pretty sad. And I remember one day I came in, I was 50, I think it's 6 at the time, in the hospital room, and I was carrying the very last house payment. I said, honey, we're out of debt. We'd been working for years to get out of debt, and she's laying in bed there, and she looked at me and said, yeah, so what? And it was like, I realized I'd been living life too fast. We sometimes tend to live life with always a goal in mind, and we forget the journey, the day-to-day journey of being with our families and doing things for God. And so I knew I had been kind of going too fast. I had a great job. I was the restaurant manager at Dutch Valley Restaurant in Sugar Creek, Ohio. It's an Amish restaurant. Our area has become a really huge tourist area. I live in Berlin, Ohio, and we have like 6 million tourists coming through there. So it's actually, it's a natural mission field that people come to us. But as a restaurant manager, a lot of stress, but it's a great job. But I just kept feeling that it might be time to move on. Now, my wife had passed away. I was out of debt, and I could afford to leave my job. I was 57 years old, but it didn't really make any sense. But then as I got farther along, about a year after Mary passed away, I just felt a call to get out and come into the woods. But it just, like I said, didn't make any sense. I was at home one morning reading the newspapers, back when I still read the newspaper every day, and I read about a man who had, in the neighboring community, he was a banker, retired, and he had passed away. And his obituary had 2 whole columns, and I read it of all the things he did, all the social clubs he was in, and I just wondered, did he have time for his family? What did he do for God? And I just prayed that morning, God, I feel a call to leave here, but I just doesn't make any sense. And I said, I would like to have some confirmation, some kind of a sign that would make sense to do that. And I also realized that morning when I read that obituary, yeah, he was in all kinds of social clubs and everything, but I thought, that's a rather boring obituary to read. And I thought, when I pass away from life and somebody reads my obituary, I would like for them to say, man, that guy lived. He really lived. But then at the end, he loved Jesus. He lived for Jesus. And so I made the decision that morning that if I can get to the decision of quitting my job, I would want someday somebody, when they read my obituary, to say that guy's either was very crazy or he's courageous, but at least he lived quite a life. And so if you ask God for a sign, you're probably going to get it, and you're probably going to get it in a way you don't imagine it's going to come to you. The restaurant business is getting pretty stressful. Now, in my case, I had a 700-seat stress factor is what I call them. And I always would tell people that if it wouldn't be for the customers and the workers, I'd have a nice job. But the food service, that's what it's all about. But people were getting really fussy anymore. And remember one night, I'm managing on the floor. A server comes to me and says, there's a customer out here and he's really angry, doesn't like his chicken. And she says, we had a buffet, and she said, I know he's been through that buffet like 3 times already. He's eaten 8 or 9 pieces of chicken. There's nothing wrong with it, but I knew I've been through the drill before. He wanted a free meal, and I wasn't about to give it to him, as my management style had changed over the years, where the customer is not always right. It's just not. We were always told that the customer is always right. Well, no, that's not true. The customer, in my case, well, then we were told the customer is not always right, but there's always a customer. Well, my theory changed that night to the customer is wrong, and I'm going to tell him that. So I went out to that booth, and here this guy, he was a weightlifter, and I think he was on steroids, and he was sweating, and he was upset. And I said, hey, sir, I hear you're not happy with your meal. He said, the chicken's not good. I said, well, you mean all 8 or 9 pieces were good? And I said, I know you had that much food. He said, are you calling me a liar? And I said, yeah, I suppose I am. And that didn't make him very happy. And then he looked at me and said, you know what, I could kill you. And I said, you probably could if you catch me, but in your situation, you couldn't even catch me. And he just got madder and madder. And finally he said, you know what, I'm going to leave here and I'm going to never come back. And I said, that's too soon. And he stormed out. And this was in a booth there where all these people were watching my performance. And I went back in the office and I sat down and I thought, wow, what's my supervisor going to think of my new management style? And but I just realized how stressful it was becoming in the food service business. The very next morning, I got called up to the front desk, and here's a guy. We were doing 600 clients, customers, or covers as we call it, for breakfast, 600. And he comes up, and he's very unhappy about our bacon that morning. We sold a couple of 100 pounds of bacon, and bacon is always good. And for some reason, he thought it was too fatty, and he was complaining about it. And I said, sir, let me tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to have a meeting with the pigs, and I'm going to talk about what they're giving us. And he didn't like my attitude either. And I went back and sat in the office and said, God, I think I got my answer. I think I'm done here. And so it was a tough job to give up a job at age 57 that was paying well. But I really felt that call to come out into the woods. But I still needed to talk to my dad. My dad was a wise man. Dad was 85, and he was still working every day. Because that's what you did when you were Amish Mennonite. You didn't hunt or fish. You worked, and he enjoyed working. And so I went over to Dad, and I said, Dad, I'm going to quit my job, and I'm going to go hike in the woods for 6 months. He said, are you sure that's the right thing to do? And I said, Dad, I prayed about it, and I feel it is the right thing. And fast forward a couple of years later, when he was like 80, I think 88 or 9, I was at his house. He said, son, he said, I have retired, I decided to retire from working. And I said, Dad, are you sure that's the right thing to do? At 89. A couple of weeks later, I came back and he said it wasn't the right thing. So, but in my case, I know it was the right thing because God called me out in the woods because we hiked together. And he gave me messages to give, and I have now given the messages to hundreds of groups that I've talked to. And the beauty now is I no longer do it alone because my wife Nancy gets to come with me and listen to my stories over and over and over, told in different fashions. I did a program, one of my first programs I did after the hike was in the Butler area here in Pennsylvania at a church. And I came in the back door and a lady met me and she said, I can't wait to hear what you have to say this morning. I said, I can't either. It was one of my first talks, and I could just go, it's so fresh, I could just talk and talk. Now I have to have notes because 18 years later, I've lost some brain cells, and I've got enough to keep going, but I have enough left yet to tell stories. So now I made a decision now. I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to hike 2,200 miles in the woods. And I didn't know anything about equipment, but I knew I needed a lot of good equipment because everything that I was going to have for the next, I thought it was going to take 6 months. I actually did it in 4.5 months, is in my backpack. So I had to buy a backpack, and then I had to decide what goes in there. So what do you need to live? Food, clothing, and shelter. That's what you need. So I did research. A lot of people do research for a year and plan. I planned this in about 6 weeks. And so I had to give the company a 6-week notice before I'd leave. So I went to an outfitter, and fortunately there's a guy there that actually hiked the trail, and so he knew what I needed. And my dad always preached, get quality. Whatever you buy, get quality. And so everything I bought was top notch at that time back in 2008. My backpack was 38 liters, and they tell me whatever size backpack you get is what you're going to fill. So the bigger your backpack, the more stuff you're going to put in there. So I had done research. I was carrying about 35 pounds, and I got my 5-degree Mont Bell down-filled sleeping bag. They said you're going to need that when you get to the Smoky Mountains. And then, of course, my water filtration and all that type of thing. Got all that, and now I still needed a trail name. On the Appalachian Trail, we all have trail names. And if we don't pick our own name, somebody's going to give it to you on the trail, and it's probably going to be one you don't want to like, you don't want to be stuck with the rest of your life. And so I took the trail name Apostle, and my name is Paul, so it's the Apostle Paul. And actually on the trail about 500 miles north is the town of Damascus, Virginia. So I was the Apostle Paul heading to Damascus. And I did have some enlightening experiences on that way. But the reason I took the name Apostle was because the word apostle means one sent forth with a message. And I thought I had a message especially for men. Don't take your families for granted. Don't take your spouses and your children for granted. It's so easy to do. We're busy, and we talk about gratitude, we talk about kind words, but so often in life we have this goal in mind. And in my case, I had a goal in mind. I had a goal in mind of Mount Katahdin in Maine, 2,200 miles away. And I often just focused on that. There's times during the day I'm hiking, I'm thinking, Paul, just stop. You're in the woods, look around, look at this beauty that you've got. But we tend to do that. We have a goal in mind. We want to get to retirement, we want to get here, we want to get there. And then we get there and it's like, that's all, that's it. And we miss the journey. So enjoy your journey as you go through life. I left on March 31st of 2008. And I got dropped off at a place called Stamp Gap in Georgia. That's where the Appalachian Trail starts. And I got out of the car and I looked up in the woods and I saw this white mark on a tree. It's called a white blaze. That was my directional. And all the way from Georgia to Maine through 14 states, I followed this white blaze. This white blaze sometimes had two blazes, and that told me the trail's going to change directions. And if there's a blaze on top, offset left or offset right, that tells me the trail's going to change. As long as I followed those white blazes, it took me to a destination. That destination was Mount Katahdin. There were other trails. There's blue blaze trails that were not part of the Appalachian Trail that would take you shortcuts. I never took that because in my mind, my dad would always tell me that whatever you do, do with your might. Things done by half are never done right. And I thought, I'm going to hike this trail one time, I'm going to do it right. And I literally passed every white blaze on that trail. And I was called a purist. Every year about 2,000 people try to do this hike, and out of those about 200 actually finish it. I was a purist, which only a few people do, but I wanted to do it and do it right. That trail is so much like the straight and narrow pathway the Bible talks about. If we follow the blue blaze or the white blazes in the Bible, it'll take us to an eternity. It'll take us to a destination. And the Bible very plainly talks about the two paths, the broad road and the narrow road. And so oftentimes, not oftentimes, but occasionally on the Appalachian Trail, I miss my turn. There's a lot of turns. I'm spending a lot of time with my hiking sticks, looking down for rocks and roots. And a couple times I missed the trail, and I realized I don't see any white blazes. I'm on the wrong trail. And I had to backtrack till I found the white blaze. But that trail never said, you just blew it. You left the trail. You can't come back. I could always come back to that trail. And it's that way in life too. We may mess up. We may make a big mess of our lives, but we're going to always come back, and we're welcome back. That first night, as I was looking in the woods, and I started to cry when I realized what I had just done. My wife had passed away. I gave up a good job, and here I am, ready to hike 2,200 miles. And it started to rain, which I was glad it did at that point because I was crying. I didn't want anybody else to see that I was a wuss. But I looked at that woods, and I realized something that day, that 2,200 miles away was a mountaintop that I was heading to, and it was overwhelming. And I realized I can't even go 100 miles. But I thought, you know what, you can do 10 miles, but you can only do 10 miles if you take that first step. And the way to do anything in life is to make a decision, take the first step, and then just keep on stepping until you reach your goal. I actually reached that goal in 4.5 months compared to 6 because I was raised to work. So I'd get up and I'd go to work, I'd hike. That first night in my tent, I was awake all night. First of all, I was sad, I was lonely, and I'm thinking, you gave up a really good job to be out here in the rain. And so I was awake all night. And that night in my tent, I kind of relived my life. It was sort of making peace with my life, and I realized I was a broken man. I mean, I was just broken. And on this trail, I asked God to be my hiking partner, and I said, I got some really tough questions to ask, and I'd like answers to them. I went back in life and made peace with things in my mind. Also that night, I thought about, there's a lot of traditions on the Appalachian Trail that happen, and I thought, I want to avail myself to every tradition. I want to enjoy this trail, and I pretty much did. Now, on the trail, a hiker burns 6,000 calories a day. And most people, if you have 3 meals, you might take 2,000 calories. So you really can't eat enough. And I had, 30 days into the hike, I weighed myself and realized I had lost 30 pounds in 30 days. And did the math and figured by the time I hit Pennsylvania, I was going to disappear off the earth completely. Because you can't eat enough. I was, so I'd stop at stores, I'd go to road crossings, I'd hitchhike into town, and pick up a food drop that I had got mailed to me. And then I'd go to the dollar stores or any store I could get to and just find the thing with the highest calories and stick it in my backpack. Right. One morning, and one day I was in the woods with 2 of my buddies that I found, and I was sitting there and I saw this little flower to my right. I love flowers. And it's a little white fringe fuchsia, it was called. And I thought, I wonder how these things taste. I made sure the 2 guys I was with didn't see me do it. But I plucked that flower and I ate it, and I thought, that's not too bad. And so I started eating flowers. I ate the rhododendron, the azalea, and one day I was in West Virginia, a Sunday morning, and these beautiful mountain laurels were there, and the guy was taking pictures of them. I'm talking about these flowers. And he said, now you realize the mountain laurel, the rhododendron, and the azalea are all 3 poisonous flowers. And I said, I didn't know that, but I also didn't tell him I'd eaten any of them. But I should probably quit doing that. 20 miles up the trail is an area called Neal's Gap, and there's an outfitter there called Mountain Crossings, and they do a very unusual thing there. If you want them to, and most people should do this, there's people in there that will take your backpacks and they'll empty it out, and they'll tell you, you shouldn't have this, you don't need this. If you plan to get 2,200 miles with that weight, you're not going to make it. 20% of hikers quit right there because they haven't planned right and they've got too much stuff in their backpacks. And I thought about that in our lives. We all have these invisible backpacks that we carry, and we carry weights in there. Now there's some weights in there that we need to carry. It's just part of life. But so often in life we allow people and sometimes the devil to put weights in there that do not belong in there. And so one of my encouragements this morning would be to you is to kind of mentally look at the backpack you're carrying. Is there things in there that should not be in there, that's slowing you down on this journey? If there is, get rid of it, and it lightens your load. I still remember that first day, I put that backpack on, I hiked a couple miles, and I got to an area and I was getting tired, and I took that backpack off, and it felt so good to have that weight lifted off of me. So one thing about traveling lightly, the lighter you can travel, the farther and faster you can get there. I was in the woods one day with my buddy, and we were just getting ready to go up the Smoky Mountains, and there's a sign posted there that said hiker advisory. It advised about a storm coming in the upper regions of the Smoky Mountains, which is where we were heading. And we got up there, and there was a ranger in there and said, you need to get into your shelters because it's going to be a cold, windy, snowy day. So these shelters that we stayed in for about 12 people, we had 30 people in that night, just all over the place, floors, and I was up in one of the bunks. I had all my clothes on. I had everything on, my shoes, socks, and my 5-degree Montbell sleeping bag. And during the night, it was so cold that my water froze solid. And we had the world champion snorer in there that night too. And so by 4:30, we were all leaving. And so fortunately, that day, I got to Newfound Gap, which is up north of Gatlinburg. And for the first time in my life, I hitchhiked and got a ride down into Gatlinburg and kind of got to recover. The power of words. That day, we were coming through Harrisburg, and I was in the motel with the man that I was with when he read the sign about words having meaning. And the TV had a weather forecast that said there's a storm coming over Paris Mountain, which is where we're going. And so we got up that mountaintop, and a storm hit us, and it was very violent and vicious. And as I saw this storm coming, and I looked over to my buddy mountain sailor, and I said, "There's that storm that we were worried about." I said, "Those words really did have meaning." And I thought so often about the power of words on that hike. As we hike, I had one of my hiking partners told me one day that he was a young man and he did things his way, and he was angry at his dad a lot of times. And one day, as he's leaving, his dad made him angry, and he said, "I cursed at my dad. I was angry at my dad, and I took off down the road." He said, "While I was going that evening, my dad dropped over dead of a heart attack." He said, "That's been, I think it's about 50-something years ago." He said, "There's not a day that goes by that I don't remember those harsh words I told my dad." And I said, "You have to know that your dad would forgive you for that." But there's also words that can heal. There's words that we can speak to our families that are healing. I remember a day I was up in Massachusetts, and we had a hiker book. In the back of the book, it would show places where people would take us into their homes. And there was this lady, her name was Maria McCabe. She was 80 years old at the time. And I'm hiking with a guy in the book. I call him Fargo. He was he was a cheesehead from Wisconsin. Him and I were hiking together. And on the trail, we're hiking 8 days, and no showers, we have beards, and we stink. But I called Maria McCabe, and I said, "Hey Maria," I said, "there's two middle upper 50-year-old good-looking men here, and we'd like to stay at your house tonight." She said, "Well, I'll meet you at this trailhead at such and such a place." And as we're heading down the trail, we get close to this 80-year-old lady. She yells up to us and says, "I was promised good-looking men." I said, "Well, you know what, give us some chance to get cleaned up and you might see a difference." We sat there at her table that night, and she said, "Now, here's the plan. The refrigerator's yours, the house is yours, I'm going to bed now, and I don't move a muscle until like 9, 10 o'clock, so tomorrow morning you're on your own, but here's a book for you," that she's pushed across the table. And I said, "What's this?" And she said, "This is a book for you to write in, just what you're experiencing here at my house, what you're seeing on the trail." And then she said something I'll never forget. She said, "When I'm at home alone in the winter and I'm lonely, I open that book and I read the kind words people wrote about me." And I thought, wow, that's pretty moving. And how easy is that to do? I was coming through, I remember my first part of the hike, I'm coming through an area down in, I think it's Virginia. There's a place there called Blueberry Patch Hospital. It's a pretty popular hospital. Stay a Christian couple. And we got in there, three of our buddies got in there. And I came in there and I was exhausted. It was raining, I was wet, and we came to that house and his wife, Lenny, said to me, "Put your wet clothing in this basket and I'll launder them for you." She said, "Better come into the house and take a shower in the house." And she said, and then down in the hostel there was a shoe warmer. Put your shoes on and warm them. And then Gary came in and gave me his car keys. He said, "Go into the town and get food." And so we did that. I realized that was straight out of the Bible. Give somebody a cup of cold water. And it was Easter Sunday when I was there. And Gary asked me if I'd come to church with him. He said, "We've never had an apostle there before." I said, "Well, I'm hiking with these two guys. I'd like to stay with them." But I said, "I'll come back someday." And I did come back one day. And if I have time at the end of here, I'll tell the story about how I came back there. I was in Maryland. I came across, when I had that storm in Parisburg, I thought, well, that's as bad as it can get. Well, when you think that, it gets worse. I was in Maryland, and I was walking the trail, and all of a sudden this big storm came on, and a branch dropped on my shoulder, and I realized it was pretty serious. So I ran out in the woods, out in the field, and grabbed a tree when this storm came through there. Violent storm. And I realized that I could die. And I realized at that moment, down on my knees, holding a tree for my dear life, how peaceful it actually was. It's like, if I pass away, I'm going to heaven. If not, then I got to soldier on. The thing about the trail is first and foremost, it's the hike that I had with God and just dialogue with God. I'm out there, no job, nothing, just me and the woods and God. And I just felt so close to God. And the people that you meet on the trail, I met some incredible people, and I write about it in a book about one of my hiking partners. And this is a kid, we'd hike sometimes for a week at a time, then you don't see somebody for a month, and you see him again. I'm hiking with a padre, Catholic priest on sabbatical. I was born Amish, raised Mennonite, and I'm hiking with a Catholic priest. And so his name is Padre, and I'm an apostle. It sounds like the beginning of a good joke. It wasn't. And we had these amazing conversations. And one day I'm talking to Padre, and I said, I'm having these mountaintop experiences up here, going over these hills and the peace I'm feeling. He said it reminds him of the Paschal mystery. And I said, I don't understand that term. He said, that just means the death and resurrection of Jesus. He said, when I go through the valleys and I see dead, decaying trees, it reminds me of the death of Jesus. He said, when I come up to the mountaintops, it reminds him of the resurrection. And he said, in life, we go through valleys and we go over mountaintops, and that's so true. But he said, someday we'll come to that last mountaintop and then we'll be in heaven. And it was just people like that I met that would speak into my life. But it was that day, I'm with Padre, and we're in Dalton, Massachusetts. That's where the Crane Paper Company is, that makes all the paper money in your wallets. And I hope there's a lot of it in there, because I got books to sell. But they have this town, it was the 4th of July, and so it was closed down. And I'm walking through town with Padre, and I'm just looking at these people in the front porches. And I told Padre, I said, look at those people in the front porches, the families. So it reminds me of what heaven might be like sometimes, just having a good time, talking, fellowshipping. And that's what I told him. I said, when I finish this hike, I think I'm going to ride my bicycle across America. And I'm just going to find people, talk to them. And that's where I got the germ of an idea to do that. Well, I did finish the hike on the Appalachian Trail, and there's many stories that happened during that hike, but I don't have time to tell them. But I decided to do that bike ride across America, did some research, and decided instead of going coast to coast, 3,000 miles, I'd go corner to corner of Washington State to Key West, Florida, the farthest 2 points I could find in America, 5,000 miles. That became my ride. And the bike ride actually was more lonely than the hike, but I met such incredible people. And I remember coming through California one time at Eureka, California, and I was coming into town, and I see these people carrying these bags on their shoulders. And all of a sudden, the car pulled in front of me, and I realized I was in front of a recycling center. And a young man and his wife came out, and they're pulling bottles on their trunk. And one bag bust open and rolled over the sidewalk. And I just pushed my bike against the wall there, and I knelt down and started picking up these bottles. He said, "Man, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm just here. I just want to help you." I said, "I'm going to bike ride across America. I'm looking for stories." I said, "I see a story here." And he said, "Well, my wife and I were homeless, and that's why we're picking up bottles." He said, we live in a park, and he said, we got chased out because there was some drug activity going on there. And he says, we had to all leave, so I picked up these bottles, and now I'm turning them in for some money. And I said, "My goodness, what do you think we're going to get out of all this?" And he said, they had enough that he thought he might get $35. I said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "My wife and I are going to go and we're going to live under a bridge for a few days until we can get back into that park." And I realized how fortunate we are. I don't even know anybody that's homeless, but I know that many are. In our area, there aren't. And I remember one day I was coming out of a station from having gotten something to drink, and a guy was coming out and was crying. I said, "What's your problem?" He said, "I'm looking for a job, can't find a job." And I thought, man, you come back to Amish country, there's 10 people that would hire you. But all across America, there are people in need. I was in Sykeston, Missouri, and I needed to get to Paducah, Kentucky. And so I wasn't supposed to, but the best way to get there was to get on the interstate for 15 miles. And if it's a Sunday morning, interstate's got a nice wide shoulder. So I'm going on the on-ramp, and on the on-ramp was a young man, I'd say probably in the 30s, long hair, and he had a sign on there he's heading to New Orleans, trying to get a ride to New Orleans. This was back when they had that explosion down in the Gulf and the oil was leaking, and he was trying to get down there for a job. And he said he just got out of prison. He said that he was in prison for selling drugs. He said, "I was guilty, I did. But he said, while I was in prison, my wife left me and my son committed suicide." He said, "I am a loser." And I said, "You know what? No, that's not necessarily true." Before that, he had looked at me and said, "How is it possible that you're on your bike across America by yourself and you got this look of peace on your face?" I said, "I've got that because I can be anywhere in America by myself, and it's because I got Jesus Christ in my heart." And he said, "Well, I don't have that." He said, "I'm a failure." I said, "You can be forgiven for all of that." As I'm getting ready to leave, I reach in my pocket and I give the guy a $20 bill. And he's crying. He said, I didn't ask you for money. I said, you didn't ask me for money, and that's why I gave it to you. It's a free gift. You did nothing to earn this. It's a free gift. And I said, that's just what it is when we get Jesus. I left there. I felt so good that I'd given a guy a $20 bill who couldn't repay me, but found out that God could. I'm coming through a Hazel, Kentucky. Literally see the Tennessee sign in front of me. And I'm always, as I go across America, anytime I found any change, I hit the brakes and I pick up change. I just want to see how much money I find across America. And I discovered that the shoulders of America's highway is a hardware store. You can find anything you want out there. It's just laying there. So I stopped to pick up money. So I'm going through this little town and I see this money clip laying there. I hit the brakes, picked it up, put it in my pocket. That night, I'm in Paris, Tennessee. I'm already in bed. And I remembered I'd found that money clip. And I thought it looked like it might have $3 in it. Well, the $3 actually turned into there were $3 bills in there, but there was like 720s wrapped around there too. And inside the 720s were $700 bills. I mean, it was like between $700 and $800 in there that I found on the highway. And I was just marveling at that. I said, God, I gave a guy a $20 bill who couldn't repay me, but you just repaid me like 37-fold. And since I think God has a sense of humor, I said, I probably should have given that guy $40. I had that money with me for a couple of years. I actually spent that winter, I actually went to that town and asked around there. I called the police department, told them about it. They said, you're obviously an honest man. He said, nobody turned it in. Could have been drug money. He said, it's yours. I thought, I need to give that away because it's free. It was free to me too. And I remember the Blueberry Patch Hostel, how they saved my hike that day when I came in there, just tired and sad and lonely and wet. And I decided I'm going to call them and see if I can come do trail magic. That means shuttle people around. And so I did. Called them up, and I didn't even realize at the time I was setting it up. It was Easter Sunday in 2013, and I'd been there Easter Sunday in 2008. So I'm in there, and every morning, Gary has all the hikers there, usually about a dozen hikers, and he has a breakfast. His wife cooks a breakfast, and they have a prayer. That morning, Gary got up and he had his prayer, and in his prayer he said, God, you are our daddy, very personal. So after the breakfast was done, I said, guys, I'm here to help shuttle hikers around. If you want me to take you down to the gap and up the trail, I will. And so I did. I took a load down there, and actually, ironically enough, there's a gentleman from my area that was hiking that day, and he was there, and I hiked with him. And behind me was a young girl that had been there for that breakfast. Her name was Jen. And as she's hiking behind me, she's crying. And so I stopped, and I turned around, and I said, I don't know why you're crying, but I said, I was out here in 2008, and I cried a lot too, because I had lost my wife, gave up a job, and I said, it's really lonely out here sometimes, especially when you've had lost like that. She said, that's not why I'm crying. And I said, well, do you want to talk about it? She said that she just came back from Afghanistan, and she went to stayed in Maine. She was from Minnesota or Wisconsin area. And she said, I hate my family, I hate my dad, and my dad left my mom, and I just hate him, I didn't want to go there. And she said, this morning when Gary prayed, God, you are our daddy, that got to me, because I don't have that daddy. And I said, well, you know what, you can. I mean, that just because your dad isn't that, there's a Father in heaven that can be that Father to you. And I encouraged her to continue and seek that truth. I went back and told Gary, I said, Gary, you're not going to believe this, but that prayer you had this morning when you said, God, you're our daddy, that got to that girl. He said, Apostle, he said, I've been doing this for years. And he said, every morning I have a prayer. But this morning in my prayer before the meal, the Holy Spirit said, this morning when you pray, use that term, God, you are our daddy. That's the voice of God that he responded. He didn't have to, but he felt that, he knew that, and that got to that girl. And because of that, and because what's so ironic about it was, this already was set in motion when I found that money in Paris, or in Hazel, Kentucky, the money that I took to him to meet this girl. This Jen was going to she didn't finish the Appalachian Trail, but she went to somewhere up north. There's a trail up north she was doing, and she had occasionally emailed me or messaged me and said, I hiked here, and her life was an absolute broken mess. She was just broken. And she called me one night. She said, I was in a bar, and I said I did horrible things, and I'm just a mess. I said, you got to get yourself into a church and get your life right. I was in church one Sunday morning, and my buzzer in my phone had an email or a message, and I looked at it. It was her. She said, I'm in church this morning, but the preacher's talking about families, and I don't want to hear that. And I said, either go to another church or keep trying. Don't give up. Keep trying. A couple months later, I got a message from her. She said, I got baptized today, and I just cried. She said, I got saved and baptized, and I just realized how that one person, God had set this up for this one person, and that's our case. I think that's the case with all of us. Sometimes things happen that we're inconvenienced, and we never know what the story is going to happen down the road. I was, a couple of years ago, I was in Israel. And I stood by the Sea of Galilee one night, and that's where I got the title for my Israel book, the 13th Disciple. I'm by the Sea of Galilee, and I'm thinking, I got visualized Jesus walking toward me, and I said, Jesus, I want to be your disciple. And if I got mine, I said, I already got 12, I'll be your 13th disciple. But I'm standing there, it's 7 miles across the Sea of Galilee, and on the other side is an area, it's called Gadara, and that's where, when the children of Israel came across, 2.5 tribes stayed there because they liked the farming. There was one man over there that really was in desperate need, broken. You all know the story. He was chained, he broke the chains, and Jesus went across there because that one man. And when that man saw Jesus, he said, I know who you are. And Jesus cast the demons out of him. But for that one person, Jesus went across that lake for him, and he does that for all of us. He has done it for all of us. There is, at the end of, I did a hike across Spain. It's called the Camino de Santiago. And at the end of this hike, first of all, in Santiago, you stop in there and you get a certificate at the hike. But hundreds of years ago, the pilgrims would walk across there. And at the end of the hike, at the ocean, there's a concrete cross. They would take off their dirty clothes, they'd throw them down there, and they'd burn them at that cross. Now, that's what the cross really is. It's a garbage pile. There's an art form in Japanese, in Japan. It's called kintsugi. What this is, they take a bowl or a vessel that's broken, and they put it back together with gold filigree, and the finished product is absolutely beautiful. And that's just like us. When we are broken and God puts us back together, and God sees us through Jesus, we are a beautiful vessel. I was in Israel, and in Nazareth. There's a little village there that it's kind of a tourist village. It kind of shows how it was back in Bible times. There's a little sheepfold there. And I was just there looking at sheep, and there's a group there. I think they're from Germany. I didn't know them, and we were talking about the nature of sheep. And this lady said they were in, I think it's in a little town in France, where the people, they take the sheep down to the towns. And I saw this in Spain. I was in places where the shepherd was leading sheep through town. And she said the sheep all of a sudden turned real wild. And they were running into buildings, and they were just panicking. And the locals were yelling at the sheep, trying to get them out. Well, they wouldn't listen. And the shepherd came along and said, you guys, you got to be quiet. Be quiet. And he called them, and they all came out because the sheep knew the shepherd's voice. And I was just amazed at that. And earlier the speaker was talking about the sheep, he was talking about animals, and about the guy that had the horses that he was mean to. We had an Amish man in our community who was pretty wild, a farmer, and he got saved and became a conservative Mennonite and became an evangelist. I still remember one night he said, when I got saved, the animals knew it. Because there was a change that happened in his life. So I believe you with this morning is, do you hear that voice? Can you hear that voice, the shepherd, when he calls you? Do you feel like you're broken? And all of us are at times. If you feel that this morning that you're broken, listen to that voice and be put back together like that Japanese art form. I would encourage you to look that up. It's called kintsugi, and it's the most beautiful thing. You think it's once it's broken, it's shattered, it's just garbage. kind of like our lives are when we're outside of Christ. But when we're put back together with Jesus in the center of it, we become a beautiful vessel, and God sees us through Jesus, and he says, just like he said in the garden, when he did the garden, it is well. And that's what he sees when he sees you, it is well. I'm going to be back in the back afterwards. I got some books. If you're interested in books, I'd be happy to separate you from your money. But again, thank you for inviting me out here. I love talking to men about just life. But keep following the path.
And thank you, Paul. It was wonderful to hear the stories, and especially I love all of the different analogies that he shared, the different journeys he's had and the things that he experienced, and how you can find Christ in everything that you do, and you can see that he's alive. So Paul, thank you so much for sharing. And I had already talked a little bit about